confident living. We should begin each new day with the utmost confidence in God, believing He will never abandon us. Here's Gene.
This is a very positive principle in the life of David. It comes from the life of David. But it's positive in a very unique sense because he made the statement, or some statements, in view of the fact that he was under terrible persecution. And the setting probably involves his own son Absalom, who turned the hearts of the people away from him. And this is what really made this difficult for David. He had actually restored his son Absalom from what he had done in committing murder against one of his brothers who had raped one of their sisters. But it was inappropriate and it was wrong. And he was banished for a time, and then David brought him back and restored him. And then Absalom begins to turn the people away from his father David. That's why sometimes we use that phrase metaphorically when say, someone was an Absalom. They really were working behind the scenes, turning people against you. They were stabbing you in the back, literally, when you believed in them. And that's exactly what Absalom was doing to his father. And so with that setting in mind, if you'll read Psalm 3, verses 1 and 2, probably this was happening in relationship to what Absalom was doing to him. Lord, how my foes increase. Now, keep in mind that when he talks about foes here, he's not talking about the enemies of Israel. He's talking about his own people who had turned against him. Lord, how my foes increase. There are many who attack me. Many say about me, there is no help for him in God. Now you can go back and you can look at illustrations of other situations where he was betrayed. For example, notice in 2 Samuel 15:30, and this may be the literal situation that's in David's mind when he's fleeing from his own son. David was climbing the slope of the Mount of Olives. This is right outside of Jerusalem. Weeping as he ascended. His head was covered. He was walking barefoot. Each of the people with him covered their heads, went up weeping as they ascended up this mountain. And by the way, David could look back and he could see the temple. He could see Jerusalem. If you've ever been on the Mount of Olives, you know exactly what that looks like. Verses 3 and 4, but you, Lord, are a shield around me, my glory and the one who lifts up my head. I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. In the midst of all of this betrayal, if indeed this is what the psalm is referring to, many believe it is, to this Absalom instance where David had to actually flee for his life from Jerusalem, from his own son. You are a shield around me, my glory, the one who lifts up my head. And by the way, when he was climbing up, we know from the record of that, as we read in 2 Samuel, he was walking with his head covered and obviously down. And he's walking barefoot with all the people. And so he's inspired. You're the one that lifts up my head. I cry aloud to the Lord. He answers me from his holy mountain. And there he could have looked back from the Mount of Olives and actually saw what is called the Holy Mountain, which really usually refers to what is called the Temple Mount, where the temple was built. And he could see that temple. And those of you who've been to Israel can identify with that. I see you nodding your heads. You can see, in a sense, what David saw as he looked back. But here's the amazing thing. He said, I lie down and sleep. Even in this terrible situation, he said, I lie down and I sleep. And I wake again. And there, basically, I believe he is saying, I'm alive. They didn't kill me. I slept, and I wake up to live. In other words, he's saying, God protected me. But why? He said, because the Lord sustains me. I'm not afraid of the thousands of people who have taken their stand against me on every side. In other words, what he's simply saying, the crowds are multiplying against me. And that's true to the historical setting when people begin to follow Absalom. Now, he may be using hyperbole to a certain extent and exaggerating because it looks like thousands. That's how he felt. But the fact is, it was a multitude of people that had turned against him. And yet he said, God was with me. You know, I think that when the Apostle Paul was in prison, for the last time, the second time, that he may have been reflecting on this psalm. He may have been reflecting on what happened to David when his own son turned against David, when the people forsook David. Listen to what Paul wrote to Timothy, his final words, because he knows he's going to die. At my first offense, no one stood by me, but everyone deserted me. Now, when he says that, who's he talking about? Those who profess Christ there in Rome. When the word was out that Nero had put him back in prison, this time in a dungeon, the Christians were so afraid they deserted him. That happened. May it not be counted against them. Boy, what an attitude that is. See, this gives us a whole new dimension of a perspective on those who betray us. But the Lord stood with me, strengthened me, so that the proclamation might be fully made through me and all the Gentiles might hear. In other words, even though he was forsaken, it didn't deter him from his calling to preach the gospel. He goes on to say, so I was rescued from the lion's mouth. And he may have been referring to the fact that he didn't have to die at that moment. And then he goes on to give us a wonderful thought and a promise. The Lord will rescue me from every evil work and will bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be glory forever and ever. Amen. Now, when he makes that statement, he's not saying, I'm going to be delivered from the lion's mouth indefinitely. I am going to be delivered from the death here in this prison. But what he is saying, for me, as he wrote in Philippians the first time in his prison, for me to live as Christ and to die as gain. In other words, he said, even if I'm killed, my life is taken here, I will be delivered. And in Paul's mind, to be delivered into the presence of Jesus was a better deliverance than even to be delivered from prison to live down here. He told the Philippians, he said, that's better for you, but not for me. It'd be far better to be in the presence of Jesus. And perhaps he was thinking about David and what David said. Now, the reflection and response question is simply this. What are some of the normal events in our lives that cause sleepless nights? I mean, this is dealing with a horrible situation. People were out to kill Paul. They were out to take David's life. But I don't know about you, but we have a lot of just normal situations that cause sleepless nights. And how can David's and Paul's perspective help us face each new day with hope and encouragement? Well, some of the incredible crises we face that cause sleepless nights, at least for me, unjust criticisms. Well, that's a tough one to handle. David faced it. Paul faced it. We all face it. Family crises. You know, nothing is closer to our hearts than our children, our families. And I know for my wife and I, there are times when we have agonized. We're thankful for our children and the decisions they're making, but they face some crises in their own lives, not of their own choice. And I remember Elaine and I waking up in the middle of the night, just literally groaning and crying. I mean, those are painful experiences as we cry out for our children. In this case, a child we felt was horribly mistreated. and that cause deep pain, sleepless nights, misunderstandings, groanings that come our way. The fact is that God is interested in everything that causes anxiety in our lives, even the little things. Because Paul wrote that we shouldn't be anxious about anything, but in everything, let our thoughts and feelings be known to God. So here's the principle. When we begin each new day, we should do so with utmost confidence in God, believing He will never abandon us.